I noticed it, because I was trying to order soup. That's the part I keep coming back to even now. Not a dramatic revelation, not a confrontation from a movie. I was lying in our bed on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days out of the hospital, still wearing the same gray sweatshirt I'd put on when we got home, and I was trying to figure out if I could stomach chicken noodle or if I needed to stick with plain broth. My phone was on the pillow next to my face. I opened our bank app because our debit cards linked to the same account, and I didn't know if we had enough in checking to cover a delivery order without dipping into savings. The savings balance read $12. I stared at the screen long enough that it dimmed. I refreshed it. Still $4,612. I went to the transaction history and there it was. A transfer out $19,800, processed on Sunday afternoon at 2:14 p.m. while I was still in the hospital waiting to be discharged. I set the phone face down on the pillow. I looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was the same off-white it always was, and I cataloged it in that specific dissociated way your brain goes when the thing it's trying to process is too large to take in all at once. My name is Lacey. I'm 32, a middle school art teacher from a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. 3 days before I found that number on my screen, I had lost our second pregnancy at 11 weeks. The first had been at 8 weeks, 14 months earlier. There is no clean language for what that kind of grief does to a body. The way it sits in your chest and your shoulders and the space behind your eyes all at the same time. I was not okay. I was also not the kind of person who lets herself fall apart completely, which, as it turns out, had become part of the problem long before I recognized it. I need you to understand what that $19,800 was before I tell you what happened to it. My husband Kate and I had been building that account for 3 years and 4 months. We called it the house fund. We had a spreadsheet, color-coded, because I'm a teacher and I have opinions about organization, and a folder on my laptop called the plan, with subfolder after subfolder of listings we'd screenshot, neighborhoods we'd driven through on weekend mornings with coffee and nowhere to be. A list of things we absolutely needed in a kitchen versus things that were just nice to have. We'd skipped 2 vacations for it. One Thanksgiving we'd stayed home and cooked for just the 2 of us instead of traveling because flights that year were too expensive and every dollar mattered. I kept a jar on my desk at school where I put whatever was left in my wallet on Fridays. Cade picked up extra landscaping jobs during the summers in the first year, coming home with dirt under his nails and $200 that went straight into the fund without either of us discussing it, because we'd both understood, without needing to say it, what we were building toward. $19,800 was supposed to be the down payment on the first home that would also, eventually, be the home where we raised a family. It was every version of the future we'd been saving into one place. I called Cade. He picked up on the second ring, which told me immediately that he'd been waiting for it. What happened to the savings account? My voice came out flat and very calm, which is what happens to me when I'm frightened. The pause that followed was long enough to hold an answer I already suspected. My mom needed to act fast on something, he said. She had the access information from when you were admitted. You'd said it was okay for her to handle anything that came up while you were in surgery. She said she'll pay us back. My mother-in-law had been given access to our account 2 weeks earlier, when I'd been rushed to the ER at the start of what became the miscarriage. We'd given her the login as a precaution, in case there were insurance complications or billing issues while Cade was with me, and couldn't step away. It was the kind of reasonable in-the-moment decision you make in a crisis, without thinking through every possible edge case. She had used that access to transfer nearly $20,000 into her own account, to set up her son Finn's new life in Denver. Finn is my brother-in-law. He's 26, and the announcement of his big break had been a recurring event in this family for approximately 5 years running. He'd graduated with a business degree, cycled through 4 jobs in 3 different cities, and for the 14 months before this phone call had been living in his parents' basement rent-free, while he figured out his next move. The Denver job was real, a mid-level sales position at a logistics company, the kind of solid, decent opportunity a 26-year-old absolutely should pursue. Not an emergency, not a crisis requiring someone else's life savings to be redirected without their knowledge. She took our house fund, I said. It's a loan, she's going to. She took our house fund while I was still in the hospital. She didn't call me. She didn't ask me. He didn't have an answer for that part. Before I tell you what the next few weeks looked like, I need to tell you something about the 8 years I'd spent being a part of Cade's family, because none of this happened in a vacuum. What my mother-in-law did with that money was the loudest version of something that had quietly been true for a long time. I just hadn't seen the whole shape of it until it was impossible to look at anything else. My mother-in-law is a woman who decides about people quickly and quietly and rarely revisits the conclusion. She decided about me the second time we met, when I picked up the dinner check before anyone else reached for it and didn't make any production of it. "You're so capable," she told me, squeezing my hand. "So independent." I thought it was a compliment. I understand now it was an assignment. Finn had always been the one who needed protecting. Not because he was incapable. He can be funny and generous, genuinely thoughtful in the small ways that count. But because no one in his life had ever let him discover whether he could handle something on his own. Because they'd always caught him before he had to find out. There was the rent my mother-in-law covered for 4 months after his first job in Atlanta didn't work out. The car she'd replaced, nicer than the original, after he totaled the one they'd bought him at 21. The security deposit he'd forfeited in Phoenix when he broke a lease, covered, no repayment timeline discussed. The credit card balance from his second year out of college, that Kate had mentioned once in passing and then seemed to regret mentioning. I had never been on the list of people who needed catching. In 8 years, there was not a single call checking on me during our first pregnancy loss. Though my mother-in-law texted Kate daily that week. When I was promoted to department head, the youngest they'd had at my school in over 2 decades, her response was, "Teaching is so lucky to have reliable people." When we hosted our first Thanksgiving instead of traveling, she spent 45 minutes rearranging the table setup I'd spent hours on, explaining cheerfully that she was just helping it feel more like home, as if what I'd made hadn't been home enough. None of these things, individually, had been worth the fracture it would cost to address them. That was always the math. That was always the calculation I'd been doing without quite naming it. And every time I'd come out on the side of letting it go, I'd told myself it was maturity, or patience, or love for Cade. It was also the slow erasure of myself from a family that had decided, without asking, that I was the one who could absorb things. I drove to my mother-in-law's house the next afternoon because some conversations can't happen over the phone and still mean what they need to mean. She was at the kitchen counter when I arrived, already composed in the particular way she has. The way that used to make me feel like I was being unreasonable before I'd even finished a sentence. "The lease window was 24 hours, she said, before I'd fully settled in the doorway. "Denver doesn't wait. Finn couldn't lose this opportunity, and I did what I had to do. With money that wasn't yours to use. You gave me account access. For my medical bills in an emergency, not for Finn's apartment deposit and moving costs." She leaned back against the counter with her arms crossed, not hostile, just settled, the posture of someone who has already decided she will be patient through this. "Lacey, I understand you're upset. You've been through something incredibly hard and your emotions are very high right now, and I get that. But you need to be reasonable. You and Kate are not in a position to be buying a house right now. With everything you've been going through, the losses, the grief, all of it, you need time to heal, not a mortgage to manage. I was actually doing you a favor. I was thinking about what was genuinely best for both of you when I made this call." I looked at her for a long moment. She believed it. That was the thing that landed in me quietly and permanently. She believed it completely. She had taken our money, our 3 years of careful sacrifice, our specific and patient future, and handed it to her son. And inside her own mind she had framed this as an act of consideration toward me. She had decided what I needed without one phone call. She had decided what I could handle without one question. She had done what she had always done, which was to treat me as someone whose inner life didn't require consulting. "I'll need the full amount returned within 30 days, I said. "I'll be following up in writing." She started something about family and time and everyone calming down. I let her finish, then I left. I called my friend Miriam from the driver's seat in the parking lot of a grocery store, half a mile away. Miriam has been my closest friend since we taught at the same school 7 years ago. She left to get her CPA license 2 years in, a decision she made after her divorce because she'd needed something she could control, and money, she said, was at least honest about what it was. She answered on the first ring, listened without interrupting, while I told her everything, and when I finished she was quiet for exactly long enough to let me know she'd heard all of it. "Here's what you're going to do," she said. "You're going to gather every document that exists, the transfer records, The original access authorization she signed. Account statements going back to when you opened the fund, showing both your contributions over time. Everything timestamped. Everything, with your name on it. And then? Then we draft a formal repayment demand. Not a text, not a conversation at someone's dinner table gets rewritten later. A letter. Specific dollar amount, specific timeline, and language about what unauthorized use of account access actually constitutes under Ohio law. So that when she reads it, she understands that you understand exactly what happened. I did everything Miriam told me to do. I spent 3 evenings pulling together a paper record of something that had only ever existed before as a feeling. Every transfer Kate and I had made into the account over 3 years, every monthly deposit, the authorization form, the timestamp on the withdrawal that proved it happened while my hospital wristband was still on my arm. Miriam drafted the demand letter herself, reviewed it twice, and sent me a final version that read the way a closed door sounds, clear, firm, and entirely without emotion. Meanwhile, Kate and I were having the hardest stretch of our marriage. He wasn't defending his mother anymore, but he was in the painful middle space where a person knows something was wrong and isn't yet ready to name out loud exactly how wrong. Because naming it means things about your family that are hard to mean. I understood that space. I had lived in a version of it for 8 years. I tried to give him room to find his way out of it, which was not easy, because my timeline was more urgent, and my patience was shorter than it had ever been. The shift came on a Thursday evening. He came through the front door with the look he gets when something has been decided in him. A particular stillness, the kind that doesn't have second thoughts running underneath it. I talked to my dad today, he said, sitting at the kitchen table without taking his jacket off. I asked him straight out whether Mom actually intended to pay us back, or if she was waiting for us to settle down and let it go. I waited. He said she figured once things cooled off, we'd understand it was for the family and move on. He set his keys down. She thought you'd let it go, Lace. She was counting on it. Something settled in me when he said that. Not surprise exactly, recognition. I'm sending the formal letter, I said. I know, he said. Send it. Finn's housewarming party was 3 weeks after the transfer, on a Saturday in October. My mother-in-law had been coordinating it for longer than that. A detail that confirmed she had known about Denver, and about her plan, well before she'd executed it. The invitation arrived in a group text with balloon emojis, and an RSVP deadline, sent with the ease of someone who had already decided nothing was wrong. We went. I wore a blue dress. Cade wore the gray shirt that fits him well. We brought a good bottle of Malbec and a leather travel wallet that Finn had mentioned wanting once, wrapped nicely, given genuinely, because none of what I was about to do had anything to do with wanting Finn to fail. Miriam had arranged for the certified demand letter to be delivered to my in-laws' home address that Saturday afternoon, timed to arrive while people were still at the party. The apartment was everything you'd expect. High ceilings, a building with a doorman, south-facing windows, furniture selected by someone with access to other people's money, and no particular attachment to any of it. My mother-in-law worked the room, with the ease of a woman who had made this happen and knew it. I talked to my father-in-law about his fishing trip. I told 2 of Finn's new co-workers that Denver had a great food scene, and that the position sounded like a real foothold. I meant all of it. I have spent a long time learning to hold 2 true things at once without one canceling the other. The signed delivery confirmation came through on my phone at 3:51 p.m. I watched from across the room as my father-in-law drifted toward the front of the apartment and picked up the envelope at the door, with the casual assumption of a man who doesn't expect certified mail to contain anything about him. He opened it, standing up, still half smiling from a conversation he'd just left. I watched the smile go first, replaced by something working very hard to look neutral, and not quite getting there. He crossed to my mother-in-law, low words shaped not to carry. She took the papers, read, looked up and found me near the window with my sparkling water, looking back at her without looking away first. She came to me in the hallway, her voice dropped to a controlled quiet that was costing her something to maintain. You did this here, tonight. You made a decision about my money while I was in a hospital bed, I said, without asking. I made a decision about the response. I wanted you to know it was coming. This is Finn's night. It's a 30-day repayment request. The amount and the timeline are in the letter. Nothing else has to happen tonight. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said something I had never heard from her in 8 years, in any register or context. She said it quietly, with something underneath it that wasn't quite what I'd expected. I didn't think you'd actually do anything about it. I know, I said. That's exactly what I needed you to understand. We went back into the main room. Cade came to stand beside me without me having to ask. My father-in-law tried to pull him aside. Cade shook his head once, gently, and stayed where he was. That small thing, that small, entirely unremarkable gesture of staying, meant more than I could explain to anyone who hasn't spent years standing alone inside someone else's family gathering. Finn found out through the specific osmosis of parties, where information travels faster than anyone intends. He appeared beside me a little later, with an untouched beer, and the expression of someone who has just been handed a first real look at the thing he's been living inside of his entire adult life. I swear I thought it was money she'd saved separately, he said. She told me it was from a savings account she'd set aside. I assumed. I never would have taken it if I'd known it was yours and Cade's. I mean that. He wasn't making excuses. He was telling the truth about how it's possible to receive the benefit of someone else's harm without understanding the cost it came with. I believed him. I know, I said. None of this is about wanting you to fail, Finn. I genuinely mean that. I'm going to pay back my half, he said. I don't know the exact timeline yet, but I mean it. I'll figure it out. He was earnest in the way people are when something has just become real to them for the first time. He said it in front of Cade and two other people who'd drifted close, which made it something he couldn't walk back into just a private feeling later. Whether he'd follow through fully, I honestly still don't know. But he said it like he meant it, and I gave him credit for that. On the drive home, Cade was quiet for about 15 minutes. Then he started talking the way he doesn't very often, without organizing it first, without knowing where it was going to land. He said he was sorry, specifically, not in the blurred way that's really just a request for the situation to resolve. He named things. He was sorry for the day he'd known and waited. For the smaller moments over 8 years when letting his mother stay comfortable had cost me something. And he'd chosen her comfort because it was easier and less permanent feeling than the alternative. For treating his family's peace as something worth protecting at the expense of mine. I kept telling myself any individual thing wasn't serious enough to be worth the conversation, he said. And I knew that wasn't entirely honest, but it was easier to look at just the one thing. I did the same, I said for a long time. I'm done doing it. He said it the way he says things when he's made a real decision, and I know the difference by now between that and a version that still has room to soften. I believed him. The months after were not a clean resolution. They never are, in real life. My mother-in-law's first response came through my father-in-law, who called Cade and suggested everyone take some time before things got out of hand. Cade told him the letter had a 30-day deadline, and the deadline stood. The first transfer came in 2 weeks later. No message, no call, just the number appearing in the account, the way a number had once disappeared from it. The rest came in 3 more installments before the deadline. My mother-in-law and I have not spoken directly about any of it since the hallway in Denver. There have been family dinners since then. There have been phone calls where she talks to Cade about ordinary things while I'm in the other room. It is not warm between us. It may get there eventually. It may not. I've stopped deciding in advance what reconciliation has to look like before I'll be willing to believe it's possible, because deciding that in advance is just another way of handing someone power over my timeline. What I know is this. I am not the same person who gave over account access and assumed that good faith would be good enough just because it should be. I am not the one who absorbs things quietly because quiet absorption is what capable, non-dramatic, independent women are assigned to do in families that have already arranged themselves without consulting them. I am Cade's wife. I am part of this family. That means being considered is not something I have to earn or wait for the right moment to ask for. It is just supposed to be true. Our house fund crossed back over $20,000 last month. We've been looking at listings again on Saturday mornings. Careful and hopeful in the way you are when you've learned that hope requires some maintenance. The folder on my laptop still says, The Plan. There's a new subfolder inside it now. I named it what it is. Some of it is about houses, most of it isn't. If you've ever been the capable one, the one nobody worries about, the one who handles it, the one everyone trusts to absorb things without making it a whole situation, I want you to hear something directly. That is not a compliment. It is an assignment no one asked your permission for, and you are allowed at any point to hand it back. You were always supposed to be considered. Not because you earned it, because you were there. Thank you for being here with me for this one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I love knowing where this community reaches. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I'll see you soon.